Hong Kong, 1972. The conference room of the Victoria Peak Hotel was packed, yet a deathly silence hung in the air. The stopwatch froze at the 4-second mark. In that exact moment, a dry, distinct snap of bone echoed through the space, a sound impossible to mistake for anything else. A second later, a scream erupted, one that no one expected to hear from the greatest. Muhammad Ali, a man who had withstood the thunderous blows of world-class heavyweights, doubled over in agony, clutching his right hand to his chest. Standing motionless across from him was Bruce Lee. This was not a fight in a ring. It was a 4-second handshake that nearly ended the career of the biggest icon in boxing history. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from casual curiosity to pure, unadulterated terror. The 73 witnesses present, including promoters, journalists, and hotel staff, watched in a state of paralysis as the invincible champion of the world withered under the mechanical force of a man half his size. The physical contrast between the two had seemed like a joke moments earlier, with Ali's massive frame towering over Lee's lean, compact build. But the reality of the damage was undeniable. The sound of the fracture had been loud enough to reach the back of the hall, cutting through the hum of the air conditioning like a gunshot. It was the sound of structural failure, the point where human anatomy reached its absolute limit and snapped. Ali's face, usually masked by a confident smirk or a playful taunt, was now a mask of genuine shock and excruciating pain. His right wrist, the primary weapon of his legendary career, began to swell almost immediately. Bruce Lee remained frozen, his hands still shaped by the grip he had just released, his eyes wide with the realization that his understanding of leverage had translated into a catastrophic injury. There was no victory in his expression, only the haunting clarity of a martial artist who had applied too much truth to a friendly challenge. The silence that followed the scream was even more deafening than the crack itself. It was the sound of a billion-dollar industry and a global legacy hanging by a thread in a quiet hotel room far from the bright lights of Las Vegas. Every person in that room understood they had just seen the impossible. The myth of Ali's invulnerability had been shattered, not by a gloved fist, but by the calculated application of physics. As the champion's knees buckled, the gravity of the situation settled over the crowd like a heavy shroud, marking the exact moment when a simple test of strength became a permanent scar on the history of sports. Ali arrived in Hong Kong at the peak of his fame, a promotional tour filled with crowds of fans and the constant flash of cameras. He was the master of this world. Bruce Lee was the local king at the time, filming Enter the Dragon. When a local producer organized their meeting, it was supposed to be a simple photo op for the newspapers. Ali, as usual, started the show. He filled the entire space, joking about Kid Bruce. His confidence was absolute. A weight difference of 35 kilograms and a height difference of 20 centimeters. For Ali, it was just another fun media event. He himself suggested testing their arm strength, unaware that he was stepping onto the territory of a man who had turned biomechanics into a deadly weapon. The atmosphere inside the hotel suite was electric, fueled by the presence of two cultural icons who dominated their respective crafts. Ali moved with a theatrical flair, his large hands gesturing wildly as he played to the gathered reporters and photographers. He viewed the encounter through the lens of a heavyweight champion who had conquered the most dangerous men in boxing, seeing Lee as a talented but physically inferior artist of the screen. Lee, by contrast, remained composed, his movements minimal and precise. He watched the boxer with a quiet intensity, his mind calculating the sheer mass and reach of the man standing before him. The producer had intended for the meeting to be a bridge between East and West, a symbolic handshake between the world of combat sports and the world of martial arts cinema. However, the competitive fire that fueled Ali's greatness could not be suppressed. He saw Lee's fame and wanted to assert his own dominance in a way that felt harmless but definitive. The heavyweight's presence seemed to shrink the room, his booming voice and constant movement creating a whirlwind of energy that Lee simply absorbed. When the suggestion of a match was made, Lee initially hesitated, knowing that the mechanics of arm wrestling were far more dangerous than the public realized. He understood that the human wrist was not designed to withstand the rotational forces of a professional athlete's full body weight when locked in a static position. But Ali persisted, his grin wide and his eyes bright with the thrill of a new challenge. He saw only a small man with fast hands, never imagining that those hands were backed by a lifetime of study into the breaking points of the human frame. The legendary boxer cleared the table with a sweep of his arm, inviting the confrontation that would change everything. He believed his massive forearm and superior reach made the outcome a foregone conclusion. He settled his elbow onto the wood with the casual grace of a man who had never known physical limitation. Lee eventually sat across from him, his expression shifting from polite hospitality to a cold, technical focus. The clash of their egos had moved beyond words and into the realm of pure physical reality, where the laws of physics cared nothing for fame or weight classes. Ali waited with the patience of a predator, ready to crush the hand of the man the world called a dragon, convinced that his own legend was untouchable. They locked hands. Ali's massive fist completely swallowed Bruce's palm. During the first second, Ali smiled at the cameras, barely applying any effort. In the second second, his expression shifted. He felt that Lee's hand was not merely pushing down, it was operating like a hydraulic press, twisting in a spiral. Bruce was not using raw muscle power, but rather vector pressure on the joints. By the third second, Ali realized that his wrist was locked in a dead zone. He attempted to break free, putting the full weight of his massive frame into the struggle, but this proved to be a fatal mistake. His own immense strength, directed against a locked joint, acted as a lever. During the fourth second, the bones of his forearm could no longer withstand the load. The mechanical advantage Lee had established created a catastrophic shear force that bypassed the muscle and targeted the skeletal structure itself. As Ali leaned his weight forward to regain control, the alignment of his wrist was already compromised beyond the point of no return. The rotational energy Bruce generated from his core traveled through his fingertips, pinning Ali's hand in a position where the larger man's strength became his own enemy. The tension reached a critical threshold where human tissue and calcified bone reached their breaking point. The sound that followed was not a muffled pop, but a sharp, resonant crack that vibrated through the wooden table and into the floorboards. It was the sound of the radius giving way under the combined pressure of a 95-kilogram man's desperate countermove and the surgical precision of a martial artist's torque. The grip that had begun as a playful challenge had transformed into a vice that channeled thousands of pounds of pressure into a few square inches of bone. Ali's nervous system screamed a warning a fraction of a second too late. The internal structure of the wrist, specifically the scaphoid and the distal radius, crumbled under the unnatural strain. There was no room for the energy to dissipate. It had nowhere to go but through the bone itself. The shock wave of the fracture traveled up Ali's arm, causing his entire body to seize. The cameras continued to flash, capturing the exact moment the invincible champion's face transitioned from competitive intensity to a mask of pure, primal agony. The 4 seconds had felt like an eternity to those watching, a slow-motion car crash where every witness could see the impact coming but was powerless to stop it. The sheer impossibility of the event kept everyone rooted to the spot as the most famous hand in the world was rendered useless in a heartbeat. Lee's focus remained unbroken until the final audible failure, at which point he immediately released the tension. But the laws of physics had already finished their work. The collapse was total and instantaneous, leaving the greatest vulnerable in a way the world had never seen before. Chaos erupted instantly. Ali's trainer, Angelo Dundee, was the first to grasp the full scale of the disaster. While Bruce Lee stood in a state of shock, paralyzed by the realization that his technique had worked with terrifying efficiency, Ali was already being rushed to the hospital. X-rays confirmed the worst fears. a fracture of the scaphoid bone, and a hairline crack in the radius of the right hand. For a boxer of his caliber, this was a potential death sentence for his career. Newspapers across the globe ran frantic headlines. The entire American sports world held its breath, wondering if the greatest would ever be able to throw his signature right hook again. Ali ended up in a cast for 10 weeks, and his return to the ring was pushed back by a full 6 months. The emergency room at the Hong Kong Central Hospital became a fortress as security struggled to hold back the tide of reporters desperate for a glimpse of the fallen champion. Inside the sterile white walls, the reality of the situation was even more grim than the public suspected. The orthopedic surgeons noted that the scaphoid was notoriously difficult to heal due to its limited blood supply, and any improper fusion of the bone would permanently rob Ali of the snapping power required for professional boxing. Every hour felt like a day as the medical team debated the best course of action, eventually deciding on a heavy, immobilizing plaster that ran from his knuckles to his mid-biceps. Back in the United States, sports analysts and doctors filled the airwaves with grim projections, discussing the mechanics of the injury and the psychological toll such a freak accident would take on a man who considered himself invincible. The promotional tour was immediately canceled, leaving a trail of broken contracts and massive financial losses in its wake. In his hotel room after the initial treatment, Ali sat in a heavy silence that was uncharacteristic for the man who usually filled every room with his voice. The weight of the plaster was a constant, physical reminder of a moment of hubris that had cost him his most valuable asset. His right hand, responsible for the knockouts that built his legend, was now a dead weight, resting on a pillow. The physical pain was gradually replaced by a cold, sharp anxiety about the future. His sparring partners and business associates were sent home, and the vibrant energy of the Ali camp was replaced by the hushed tones of recovery and rehabilitation. Every morning began with the same ritual of checking for sensation in his fingertips and staring at the white surface of the cast, looking for any sign that the strength was still there beneath the shell. The world watched and waited, following every leaked medical report with the intensity of a championship fight, as the man who could float like a butterfly found himself grounded by a 4-second encounter that defied every rule of the sport he had mastered. After months of rehabilitation, Ali returned, but this incident forever changed his attitude toward martial arts. At a press conference, he admitted that his pride had failed him. He publicly cleared Bruce Lee of any blame, stating that Lee had warned him of the danger, but he, Ali, simply did not know how to lose. This story remained in the shadows of his great fights, but it was those 4 seconds in Hong Kong that proved one truth to the entire world. For every greatest, there is someone who understands physics better. The wrist healed, but the lesson that mass does not always mean an advantage was one Ali carried through the rest of his life. The recovery process had been a grueling journey of regaining trust in his own body, moving from the static confinement of a cast to the painful, repetitive motions of physical therapy. Every morning during that period, he had worked with specialists to restore the dexterity that had once made his right hand a weapon of surgical precision. While the world waited for the return of the charismatic showman, Ali was undergoing a quiet, internal transformation. He spent hours studying the very biomechanics that had defeated him, gaining a profound respect for the leverage and torque that Lee had utilized so effortlessly. When he finally stepped back into the ring, his style showed subtle signs of this new awareness. He became more observant of his opponent's structural alignments, no longer relying solely on the overwhelming force of his punches, but incorporating a deeper understanding of timing and positioning. His interaction with Bruce Lee had stripped away the illusion of absolute physical dominance, replacing it with a strategic humility that served him well in the twilight of his career. The two legends met privately several times after the incident, sharing a bond that only two men who had pushed the limits of human capability could understand. Ali often spoke of the Hong Kong encounter not as a defeat, but as a necessary awakening that saved him from future disasters by teaching him the boundaries of his own invincibility. The scar on his wrist became a badge of wisdom, a permanent reminder that even a king can be humbled by the laws of nature. As the years passed and the details of the hotel room incident faded from the headlines, the impact remained etched in Ali's approach to life. He moved with a renewed sense of purpose, acknowledging that true power came from the integration of mind and body rather than mere size. The greatest had been broken and rebuilt, and in the process, he had discovered a strength that was far more resilient than bone. He had learned that a master of combat is not just a man who can hit, but a man who respects the hidden forces that govern every movement, every strike, and every victory.